Amos 6:1 through 7. Woe to you who are complacent in Zion, and to you who feel secure on Mount Samaria, you notable men of the foremost nation, to whom the people of Israel come. Go to Calneh and look at it. Go from there to Great Hamath, and then go down to Gath in Philistia. Are they better off than your two kingdoms? Is their land larger than yours? You put off the day of disaster and bring near a reign of terror. You lie on beds adorned with ivory and lounge on your couches. You dine on choice lambs and fattened calves. You strum away on your harps like David and improvise on musical instruments. You drink wine by the bowlful and use the finest lotions, but you do not grieve over the ruin of Joseph. Therefore you will be among the first to go into exile. Your feasting and lounging will end.
The bloodiest war in American history began at Bull Run, a creek that ran through McLean's property. McLean was not at all sure why the armies were fighting, but he was quite sure that he did not want them fighting on his property. If he could not change the course of the war, he at least did not have to be part of it. McLean decided to sell out and go where the war would never find him. He chose the most obscure place in the whole country, or so he thought. An old house in the village of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. 4 years later, General Grant was pursuing General Lee through Virginia. In Appomattox County, Grant sent a message to Lee asking him to meet and sign a truce. The place where they met to sign the peace that ended the Civil War was Wilmer McLean's living room. Some things you just cannot get away from. Well, this morning there's a story about another farmer who kind of had enough. He watched what was going on around him, and the Lord spoke to him, and when the Lord speaks to prophets, so he goes about sharing what the Lord has said to the 10 north. Around, he's a border town. He lives in Tekoa, which is a border town in southern Judea. And so keep in mind, it used to be one country under Solomon, right? And then there was civil war. And Benjamin and Judah were the south in Jerusalem. And then there were 10 tribes in the north, which would later become Samaria, are the remaining tribes of the nation of Israel. And so he's from the southern people, and he's going to talk to the northerners. How do you think that's going to go over? Just out of curiosity. How do you like it when outsiders come in and tell you how you should be doing things? Right? Not very well. And what he does is absolutely brilliant. And we're going to take a look at it because I think it's absolutely a roadmap for us with how to talk to people who have an innate instinctive bias or dislike for us, even though they've never met us. How do we talk about difficult subjects to people who already think we're against them? Because in our world, it's very much us versus them, isn't it? All right, let's take a look at this guy. Now, traditionally, Amos has been called a shepherd, but that's not a very good description of Amos, because the word that's used for a simple shepherd, like David, is not the same word that is used for Amos. Amos's word means basically a sheep breeder. He's a rancher. He breeds sheep and goats and cattle, and it says he has a fig orchard, so he's also a farmer. So we get a little bit of understanding. I think we can grasp that maybe down here better than some places that are more urban, because we think immediately of people that come to mind, strong men and women that are farming, and they're running businesses, and they're running herds, and they're doing all this stuff. And that's what he was. He was not just some wandering prophet that went from place to place. He had a life. He had a life. And then God puts on his heart the message to Israel that the end is coming. And that they need to change course dramatically, or else they will be consumed by an invading army. And they are consumed in 722 BC by the Assyrian army. And completely, the entire nation is completely broken when it happens. They never recover. Ever. They are going to intermarry with the Assyrians. They're going to be known by the Jews as half-breeds. because instead of keeping their Jewish lines pure, they intermarry with pagans, and it kind of messes the whole thing up, and pretty soon what you have left is Samaria in Jesus' day. Right? So this is what Amos is talking about. Do you understand we talking about what the world looks like back then? How it's such an easy comparison to the world we're living in now, where violence, because if no one holds them back, our default is apparently violence as a people, is astonishing. Is astonishing. What we're seeing around the world right now, enough to make someone lose hope in human beings. He said it's coming. In fact, he says justice will roll like a river through. Against the people of Israel. Wow. He's not messing around. The one thing that we know for sure, because God creates us as eternal beings, that sense of sentience that you have, that you can't explain. How does Brett explain to someone this interaction of electricity and chemicals and hormones in his brain somehow is him? He would scoff at that. He would laugh at that. He said, that's not me. That's just my body. It's just the way my body works. But I know me. I have a mind. I have a soul. I feel things. I think through things. I am sentient. We are made for eternity. That part of you will never die. But it will be judged. And that's the scary note that Amos kind of paints for people, is that judgment is a real thing, or else God is not a just God after all. If there is no judgment, then there is no justice. And then what do you say to all of those Christians that were murdered in the Sudan, completely innocent, murdered by people that just killed them for the sake of being Christians and being weak? Judgment is coming. There's going to come a day when the wrongs that we have done and the wrongs done to us will be made known, and we will face punishment for not responding to God's grace if we don't know Jesus. It's the simplest thing in the world. When you stand before God, are you standing alone? Or do you have an advocate? Do you have someone standing with you who's going to try you, who's going to be the legal advice for you? Is going to be an advocate for you before the judge. And we believe that that advocate for us is Jesus Christ. So when we stand up on the day of judgment, we don't have to be afraid, because the one who judges us the most severely is the one who loves us the most dearly. And there's an irony. People that want nothing to do with God on earth, who don't want to know Jesus, they made up their minds, they're decided. They got it figured out, they've got it wired, and they really don't need God to be a part of their life. God honors them. That is its own form of justice. Because when we get to the end of our life, the Bible paints a picture, and I'm not going to preach a whole series on this, but just understand, the Bible paints a very interesting picture of hell. It uses metaphor all the time. It's as though the people that are writing, the prophets and the people that are writing scriptures, they're trying to describe something that is so horrible that words almost fail to do it any kind of justice. Can you imagine in eternity, we have lived our lives with God in our presence, with God in our midst, from the moment we come out of our parents' womb. Can you imagine a life where God is simply absent? And then it lasts forever. And the regret that you feel is unlike any regret that you've ever felt in your entire life, because there's no end to it. If you could imagine the grief of backing over one of your children on your rush to get to work in the morning, magnify it by 1,000, it wouldn't begin to touch the grief of people who recognize, uh-oh, I really am separated from God forever. And we use words like lake of fire and the worm that doesn't end. to describe it, because how else do you describe something so horrible? There's no words. God honors our decision to avoid him in the eternity if we return. And that is something I think we can't forget that. We have to be cognizant of that, because we might feel like, well, yeah, but I'm okay because I have Jesus. That's great. Does everyone you know have Jesus? Does everyone you love know Jesus? Do all your neighbors know Jesus? If so, good for you. But there are still a lot of people in my world who, if they died today, would face a judgment, and Jesus would not be their advocate. And they would face God alone, and they would try to explain to God how they are worthy of his entrance into the wedding feast, into his kingdom, based on all the good things they've done. And they'll realize real quick, those good things don't add up to too much. All right, let's pick this up in Amos, because this is amazing. I want you to see what he does here. Okay, so we've identified the fact that he's a farmer rancher from the southern kingdom, and he crosses the border and he goes into northern Israel, and he begins to lay out these woes. Now, when we talk about woes in the Old Testament, think of those as like national curses, that the prophet is basically cursing these people or these cities for what they had done. He's saying justice is going to come and it's going to swallow you up. Look out. And then he begins to list the cities. Look at what he does. Amos starts his book by levying curses on all of Israel's neighbors. Damascus, Edom, Gaza, Tyre, Ammon, Moab. Don't miss what he's doing here. He's warming them up. He starts with what they agreed on. Now, I say this is really important. There's three parts to what he does here. And I don't often talk about, I'm preaching on a biblical principle or things like that, because I think sometimes when we do that, we reduce the principles that are in the Bible. We reduce them down to kind of simplistic ideas, and I don't know if that's always the best, but I will do it here. There is a godly principle at work here. If you're trying to communicate with someone who sees you as the enemy, who sees you as other, who sees you as different from them on a topic or on religion or politics or whatever, how do you talk to them? Here's the roadmap. He starts with what they have in common. All those enemies that he listed, they surround Israel. It's like a bullseye. He lists every neighbor that Israel has and says, woe to them. And you know, the guys in the north are like, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, go get him, God. Yeah, this guy's not so bad, right? He's not so bad. Because he's not starting with where they differ. He's starting where they agree, right? For example, and I won't get too much into this, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about this. My own personal beliefs are very strong when it comes to abortion. I just don't see how abortion isn't murder of a human being. And whether it's justified or not is a whole different topic, but I just don't see that we get away from that one. A lot of people think very differently about that. In my own family, people think differently about that. And so how do you even begin a conversation about something like that? And then what I would do is I would start with something that we have common ground on. And that would basically be something like this. Do you agree that the taking of innocent life, like in the way Putin is doing, shooting missiles into hospitals and schools, is always wrong? It's never justified. It's intentionally murdering children. Do you think that that's okay? If they say yes, they have other problems, right? I mean, this is common ground. We all could go, yeah, that's wrong. He shouldn't be doing that. It's evil. It's murder. It's evil. It's unnecessary carnage in a bloody, bloody war. And its sole purpose is to sow terror. Yes, always evil. Okay, now you've found some common ground. This is what he does. He woes on all these, and all of them are historical enemies of the south and the north. They have been harassing Israel not for the new version of Israel. They were harassing Israel back when David and Solomon were running things. There's a long history of grievances between these people. And he starts by saying, let's identify common ground. You know who's really bad? All these guys that have been harassing us for centuries. And the people in the north go, all right. And then look what he does. He pivots. And he curses his own people. his people in the south. He says this. This is what the Lord says. The people of Judah have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. They have rejected the instructions of the Lord, refusing to obey his decrees. They have been led astray by the same lies that deceived their ancestors. So I will send down fire on Judah, and all the fortresses of Jerusalem will be destroyed. What? He calls down a woe, a curse, on his own people. And you go, why would he do that? Look at what he's doing. He establishes common ground. And then in humility, recognizes that the sins that Israel is committing are the same sins that Judah is committing. And it's hypocritical to point your finger at them before you take the plank out of your own eye. Right? Remember when Jesus is talking about we point fingers at each other, when we judge each other when we don't need to? And he says, why don't you take that plank out of your eye before you get so upset about the speck in your brother's eye? That's what Amos is doing here. Like they thought they liked him before. They love him now. Not only did he cast a curse of God against all their enemies, their biggest competitor, the sibling rivalry, the one that really gets their go, he calls down a curse on Judah as well. They are loving him. That's good, because he has some hard words for them to hear. Establishes common ground. In humility, recognizes the sins of his own people or party or group or whatever you want to call them. If you don't do those things, you have no right to speak the truth that is difficult to hear. Because you're not dealing with sin in your own camp. So if we're talking politics, whatever side you're on, start with the easy things that you see that your side might be not doing the best. Might not be the greatest thing in the world. Or whatever your thing is, where it's us versus them. In humility, identify where you guys are, your side is falling down on the job. Now you've opened up room for a conversation. And now you have given them the capacity to hear the hard words because you overcome their bias against you. And now the hard truth that needs to be spoken at least will be listened to with much more clarity. After this, he drops the hammer. And he tells them the sins that they are committing are the sins that will ruin them. As a nation, they are corrupt. What's going on in Israel? Well, here's what's going on. He says they're going to all the festivals. They're doing all the religious things. They're offering the sacrifices. But their heart's not really in it. They're just hedging their bets. Right? It'd be like if you guys came here at 9, went to Riverside at 11, went to Mass later on in the day, and then swung by on Saturday when the Jehovah's Witnesses are hanging out, just to make sure you covered all your bases, right? That's what they were doing. Their heart wasn't in these sacrifices. It was all for show. And God says, I detest your sacrifices. They are putrid to me. Oh my goodness. The language that Amos uses. It's incredible. But God says, if your heart's not into your sacrifice, I don't want it. Because what I want more than anything else is you. It's your heart that I want, not your sacrifice. Come to me, he says. But they don't. They rely on their sacrifices. They rely on their military power. Israel was actually a fairly powerful nation of its own, in its own right. The king Jeroboam II had expanded the borders of Israel, and they were rich. They were wealthy from their plunder. They were wealthy from the tribute they took. They were wealthy. And then they got complacent. Because Israel was given a mission. When Israel was formed, do you remember Israel's mission God gave it? I made you to be a light among the nations, that through you salvation would come to the whole world. I made you to be a light unto the nations, a blessing to others. And they forgot that that was the mission. And they decided that it was really all about what they could get. And so, they conquer and pillage. And so, they take the poor. And what happened back then, slavery was a lot different back then than what we had in America. There were two kinds of slavery options for you back in the Old Testament in Israel at this time. If you enslaved a fellow Jew, they were yours for 7 years. Now what that meant was, when you have got to the end of your rope and there's nothing left to sell, you could sell yourself. And people did. And they worked as bond slaves or bond servants until that 7th year where they were released, and then their debt was canceled, everything was paid off, and you couldn't keep them more than 7 years. The rules were a little different when it came to non-Israelite people, foreigners. Pretty gray area there. Basically, you kind of kept them as long as you wanted to. Didn't have the same rights. So this was a thing. And what was happening is that the rich were intentionally putting people into bond slavery and then giving them no legal representation. So when they said, okay, time's up, their owner said, you think so? That's not the calendar we have. Well, it's true. I've done my time. Debt's paid. We'll prove it. Prove it in court. And so they would have people with no money have to try and fight in court against the wealthy. And Amos says even the courts are corrupt because they hand out guilty or not guilty verdicts based on who's paying them. Israel has fallen very far from where God had placed her as a light unto the nation. I want you to think about those people that you know right now. People that you love who are facing families that are torn asunder because of different views on politics, of all things. Maybe differences in religion, that one's been around a long time. Think of the Thanksgiving dinners, where almost everyone knows what is taboo and shouldn't be discussed at the table lest violence break out. Look at what the Lord says in Amos 5, verse 4. It says, this is what the Lord says. The people of Judah have sinned again and again, and I will not let them go unpunished. They have rejected the instructions of the Lord, refusing to obey his decrees. They have been led astray by the same lies that deceived their ancestors. So I will then send out fire on Judah, and all the fortresses of Jerusalem will be destroyed. Interesting. Did you catch that? He's not just saying doom is coming to you, O Israel. He's saying doom is coming to Israel and Judah. Because they're both doing the same kinds of things. They've grown complacent, proud, idolatrous, and their religion is all just for show. And God says it's all going to end. The whole thing's coming down. And so it does with the invasions of the Assyrians in 722. All that military might they thought they had, gone, broken. All their wealth, stolen. All their children, enslaved. This is what was lying ahead for Israel. And what does God have to say about this? He says this in verse 21. I hate all your show and pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals and solemn assemblies. I will not accept your burnt offerings and grain offerings. I won't even notice all your choice peace offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise. I will not listen to the music of your harps. Instead, I want to see a mighty flood of justice, an endless river of righteous living. A flood of justice in my life. What would that even begin to look like? Not shortchanging anyone for anything, and seeing the image of God, the imago Dei, in someone else. Recognizing the depth of their eternal value when you look at them in the eye. Maybe they're just checking out your groceries at the store. Have you considered that person checking out your groceries at the store was made for eternity? That is something to marvel at? Because we don't understand it, and yet it is what it is. Justice. It's what happens when you stop devaluing people and give them what they're due. And righteous living, what he means by that, just means this: shalom with God and man. Peace with God and peace with mankind. And living in that harmony. That space, that Overton window between those two is where we live. So the sermon's over. We're going to move on in our service. But I think I would be remiss if I didn't give you just a chance to process this a little bit. If you know this biblical principle of starting with things in common, moving to humility, and then moving to the hard truth that can be hard to hear, who do you think of? When I talk about that, who do you think of? Who comes to mind? Who's the Lord bring to your mind and say, this is a person? This is a person that you could talk to. This is a person, this is a relationship that is fraying a bit, that needs shoring up. Start with common ground, then humility, and then drive home the truth. Don't start with both guns blazing. It's just going to get you nowhere, right? All right.